The night air felt too still. The kind of stillness that presses against your skin and tells you something is terribly wrong. I remember standing in my living room, the only light coming from the faint glow of the porch lamp, watching a shadow move where no shadow should be. My heartbeat was so loud it felt like it echoed off the walls, and for a moment I wondered if fear alone could stop a person's breath. If you've ever sensed danger before you could explain it, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Instincts like that save more lives than people realize. I hadn't touched the birthday wine that started it all. Someone else had. And as I stood frozen in that dark room, I realized the truth had been circling me long before I was ready to face it. Let me show you how it all began. I knew something was terribly wrong the moment I touched the gift box. It was supposed to be a simple birthday present, nothing more than a kind gesture from my daughter-in-law. But the second it rested in my hands, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. I remember standing there in my living room in Cedar Hills, Oregon, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But there was a look in Brianna's eyes that I couldn't ignore, something sharp and expectant, as if she were watching for a very specific outcome. Even now, I can still feel that first jolt of unease, the way my instincts whispered that the celebration wasn't as harmless as it seemed. I've lived long enough to know when a moment shifts from ordinary to dangerous, and that afternoon, the shift was undeniable. It hit me so suddenly that I almost felt embarrassed for noticing it. Almost. I carried the box to the kitchen, trying to steady my breathing, telling myself I was imagining things. But deep inside, there was a quiet certainty growing, a cold awareness I couldn't push away. I didn't know the full truth yet. I didn't know how close I was to real harm. I only knew the gift wasn't what it appeared to be, and that the woman who gave it to me had something else in mind entirely. That unease stayed with me long after everyone left. And as the house finally settled into silence, I kept turning the moment over in my mind, wondering what exactly she had placed in my hands. That was the beginning, when suspicion first took root and refused to let go. When I think back to that afternoon, what unsettles me most is how beautiful the bottle looked. Brianna had wrapped it in this elegant cream paper, tied with a ribbon that matched perfectly, as if she had spent hours choosing every detail. It was the kind of thoughtful gesture she never made, at least not toward me. Our relationship had always been polite, distant, predictable. So when she placed that bottle in my hands, I felt a ripple of confusion beneath the polite smile I tried to hold. I kept telling myself it was just a birthday gift, that maybe she was trying to be warmer, more considerate. But the longer I looked at it, the more something inside me twisted. It wasn't the wine itself. It was the way she lingered after giving it to me, hovering just a bit too long, watching me as though she expected me to open it immediately. That attention felt out of place, almost rehearsed. And even though I brushed it off at the time, the feeling stayed with me like a small stone in my shoe. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I set the bottle on the counter and tried to ignore the discomfort. Cedar Hills had always been a quiet place, and I'd never been someone who read too much into things. Still, each time I passed that counter, my eyes drifted toward the wine and that strange heaviness returned. It helped that my neighbor, Janet, stopped by often. She was the kind of woman who filled a room with warmth without trying. Knowing she planned to visit the next day gave me a sense of normalcy, a steadying breath I didn't realize I needed. I had no way of knowing then how that simple visit would become the moment everything changed, or how the bottle sitting on my counter would shift my entire world once it was finally opened. Janet came by for lunch the next day, just like she always did. There was something comforting about her presence, something that made my little house in Cedar Hills feel lived in, even on quiet afternoons. We talked about ordinary things while I put together a small meal, and for a while, the strange feeling from the day before settled into the background. I remember thinking how grateful I was for her steady friendship, how her warmth made it easy to forget whatever had been bothering me. When I reached for a drink to offer her, my eyes landed on the wine bottle sitting on the counter. I hesitated for a moment. It looked harmless enough, pretty, elegant, untouched. And Janet always enjoyed a small glass with lunch. I told myself it was silly to overthink it, that I was letting my imagination run wild. So I opened it, letting the cork pop with that familiar sound. She laughed, grateful for the treat, and poured herself a glass. I didn't have any. My doctor had told me to avoid alcohol with my medications, and I'd been strict about that. At the time, it felt like nothing more than a personal rule I was trying to keep. Looking back, that decision feels like a line drawn by fate. As the afternoon went on, everything stayed perfectly normal. Janet finished her glass. We cleaned up, and she headed home. I might have forgotten the whole moment if not for what happened later. That evening, Brianna called my son. I wasn't on the call, but I heard enough from the next room. Her voice had this sharp edge to it, this urgency she couldn't hide. It was the kind of panic people feel when something slips out of their control. I remember standing frozen, every earlier doubt flooding back at once. I didn't understand it yet, but something inside me shifted that night. A quiet alarm began ringing in the back of my mind, steady and insistent. And when Janet mentioned later that she wasn't feeling well, that alarm grew louder, pressing me to pay attention in a way I hadn't before. It started with Janet mentioning a strange heaviness in her stomach. At first, she tried to laugh it off, brushing it aside the way people do when they don't want to make anyone worry. But I saw the way her hand drifted to her side, the way her breath grew shallow, the way a faint uneasiness settled across her face. Something inside me tightened. It wasn't dramatic, not at the beginning. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice, but I felt it immediately. By that evening, the discomfort seemed to grow. I kept replaying the lunch in my mind, the glass of wine, the way she'd smiled as she lifted it. A cold thread wound itself through my chest. I didn't want to sound alarmist, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that something was wrong, truly wrong. So I offered to drive her to the hospital, telling her it was better to be safe. She didn't argue. That alone scared me more than anything. The hospital lights felt too bright, washing everything in a sterile glow that made me feel even more exposed. The nurses moved quickly once they heard her symptoms, and the doctor's expression shifted into something serious, something that told me this wasn't indigestion or fatigue. He mentioned the possibility of toxins. That word hung in the air like a weight. Toxins. I felt my breath catch, because in that instant, my mind went straight to the bottle on my counter, wrapped so carefully, given with such strange intensity. And no matter how much I tried to push the thought away, it kept rising, steady and undeniable. Brianna. I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But in the quiet of that hospital room, with machines humming and Janet's breathing uneven, I finally admitted it to myself. Something had been done to her, and I feared I already knew by whom. The doctor ordered more tests, including toxicology, and as they took her back, I felt the world shift beneath me. I knew the next answers I heard would change everything. The wait for the toxicology results felt endless. I sat in that stiff hospital chair with my hands pressed together, trying to quiet the unease rolling through my chest. Every few minutes a nurse walked by, and each time I felt my breath catch, hoping for answers and dreading them at the same time. The uncertainty was its own kind of torment, and yet a part of me already sensed what was coming. Something deep inside had been whispering the truth long before anyone said it aloud. When the doctor finally returned, his expression told me everything before he even spoke. There was a heaviness in his eyes, the kind that comes from delivering news no one wants to hear. He explained that the tests showed clear signs of ethylene glycol, antifreeze. Hearing that word felt like someone had struck me across the chest. Antifreeze. Not an accidental contaminant. Not a mistake. A poison that had been placed deliberately. I remember gripping the arm of the chair, feeling the room tilt for a moment. Because the truth hit me all at once. That bottle wasn't meant for Janet. It was meant for me. And knowing she had taken that sip because I offered it, that nearly brought me to my knees. The doctor asked if I had any idea who might want to harm me. At first, I wanted to shake my head, pretend there was no one, pretend my life was too ordinary for something like this. But memories began rising like dark bubbles in water. Brianna asking about my medications. Brianna lingering near my paperwork. Brianna pressing me about my recent will update, wanting to know why I had shifted things around. I had changed the will only a month earlier, thinking nothing of it. But she had reacted to that decision with a sharpness I brushed aside at the time. Now it came back with painful clarity. As the doctor spoke about contacting the authorities, all I could think about was Michael, my son, her husband. He needed to know, and I needed to be the one to tell him before the world broke open around us. Telling Michael was one of the hardest moments of my life. I waited until we were both sitting down, where the weight of the news wouldn't knock either of us off our feet. I could feel my hands trembling as I told him about the hospital, about the toxicology results, about the antifreeze, and then, finally, about the wine. For a few seconds, he just stared at me, the disbelief so strong it looked like he physically couldn't process the words. But disbelief doesn't hold long when the truth is already inside you, waiting to be acknowledged. I watched his expression shift, slowly, painfully, as memories rushed forward. He began remembering things he had brushed aside, her sudden interest in my medications, the way she questioned my routines, the irritation she tried to hide when I mentioned updating my will. All those little moments he once explained away as stress or tiredness now rose up like warning signs he had failed to see. Seeing the realization hit him was like watching something inside him break. This wasn't just the collapse of trust, it was the collapse of a life he thought he understood. And as his mother, it shattered me to see that kind of pain settle in his eyes. Our family shifted in that moment. Not gradually, not gently. It splintered. And even though neither of us said it aloud, we both knew nothing would be the same again. When the detectives called asking us to come in, Michael didn't hesitate. There was a quiet resolve in him I had never seen before. As we drove to the station, I felt the tension tighten around us, knowing we were about to uncover far more than either of us imagined. The detectives took over quickly once the hospital confirmed the poisoning. Michael and I sat across from them in that small, windowless room, the air thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. I remember staring at the table, trying to steady my breathing while they laid out what they had found. Their voices were calm, controlled, but the information hit like strikes of cold lightning. Brianna had lived under different names, not just once, but several times. Each identity came with a trail that never quite made sense. Jobs left abruptly, rental homes abandoned, records that looked clean, only because someone had made them that way. And then they mentioned the marriages. 2 of them, both ending in sudden, unexplained deaths. One labeled a tragic accident, the other written off as a medical event. Hearing that made something inside me twist so sharply I had to grip the edge of the chair. I kept thinking of all the small things I had ignored. Her questions about my medication schedule, her interest in how often I walked alone in the evenings, her oddly timed visits when she claimed she was just checking in. The detectives showed us documents, notes, and even a file on her laptop, lists of my daily routines, my prescriptions, and even estimates of my estate. Seeing it in black and white made every hair on my body stand on end. She'd been studying me, planning around me. As the detectives explained their next steps, I felt dread settle into my bones. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't emotional. This was repeated, practiced, and deliberate. And we were now part of a pattern that stretched back farther than any of us realized. When they told us they were going to bring her in, I felt both relief and fear. Relief that they were finally acting, and fear of what someone like her might do when cornered. And as we stepped out of that room, a quiet voice inside me whispered the truth I didn't want to face. This wasn't over. The detectives decided the best chance of finding Brianna was to draw her out, and they asked Michael to help. Hearing that made my stomach twist. I knew it was necessary, but watching my son be placed in the center of something this dangerous felt unbearable. Still, he nodded with a steadiness that both broke me and made me proud. They had him post a message that sounded worried, regretful, even protective of her, something that might make her believe he still trusted her enough to meet. While he typed, I stood behind him, feeling every keystroke like a pulse of dread. The house felt too quiet, the minutes stretching thin and brittle as we waited for any sign she'd taken the bait. It didn't take long. She responded. Just seeing her name appear on his screen made my breath catch. The detectives moved fast, tracing the location and sending officers toward the spot where she agreed to meet. For a moment, it felt like this nightmare might finally close. But then everything shifted. The officers arrived, and she wasn't there. They found signs she had been, but she'd slipped away moments before they reached her, as if she had sensed them coming, as if she knew the walls were closing in. When the detectives told us she was gone again, a cold dread settled deep inside me. A woman capable of so much harm was now frightened, cornered, unpredictable, and still out there. That night, as I locked every door and checked every window, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't running anymore. She was circling, and sooner or later, she would come back. The night she came back, I felt it before anything happened. A heaviness settled over the house, the kind that makes every sound sharper, every shadow darker. I had locked every door, checked every window twice, but none of it eased the sense that something was moving toward me. It was almost midnight when the air changed, when the quiet outside became too quiet. I stood in the hallway, holding my breath, listening. And then I heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps in the gravel by my front porch. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. I moved back into the living room and turned off the last lamp, letting the darkness settle around me. I didn't want to believe it was her, but I knew. Something in me recognized her presence the way the body recognizes danger long before the mind catches up. The scrape at the back door came next, gentle at first, then more determined. When the lock finally snapped, the sound split through the house. I crouched behind the heavy oak cabinet, trying to steady my shaking hands. I thought about my age, about the fragility I'd felt creeping in these past few years, but I also thought about Janet, about Michael, about the life Brianna had tried to take from me. And beneath the fear, a spark of anger flared. Her footsteps moved slowly across the kitchen floor, deliberate and predatory. She whispered my name in a low, chilling tone, as if she were calling a child out of hiding. I rose to my feet. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide forever. So I stepped into the dim light and faced her. She froze, eyes wild, her expression twisting into something unrecognizable. She moved toward me, but before she reached me, the front door burst open. Officers rushed in, shouting for her to stop. She turned toward them, startled, and for a moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. When they finally pulled her away, I felt my legs give out. The adrenaline drained from my body all at once, leaving me trembling on the floor. But I was alive, and as the officers helped me up, I knew the long night was finally ending, and the long healing was about to begin. When the officers finally took Brianna away, the house fell into a silence so complete that it almost frightened me more than the chaos that came before it. I remember sinking onto the couch, every muscle trembling, my breath coming in shallow waves. The adrenaline that had carried me through those awful moments faded, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. Michael sat beside me not long after, and even though neither of us said a word, I felt his hand on my shoulder and knew I wasn't facing the aftermath alone. In the days that followed, I found myself moving slowly through the house, touching familiar things just to remind myself that they were still mine, my safety, my routines. Even my trust in the world had been shaken, and rebuilding them felt like learning how to breathe again. But I kept thinking about the strength I had found inside myself, the courage I didn't know I still had at my age. Survival changes you. It shows you who you are in ways you never expect. I learned how important it is to trust the small instincts, the quiet warnings that whisper long before danger becomes obvious. I learned how vital family is, and how love can anchor you even when fear tries to pull you under. And I realized that aging doesn't mean fading. Sometimes it means standing up when it matters most. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to live, and it isn't easy to tell, but sharing it helps me reclaim the pieces of myself that fear tried to take. If you've ever felt a moment when your instincts told you something was wrong, I'd like to hear about it. Your experience might help someone else find their own strength.